My name is Ben Cutler. I'm one of our solutions specialists here with WinPeer. Again, this is the fourth part of our global address cleansing series. Today we're looking at global address verification. I'm joined today by Robert Dickson, who leads the North American Professional Services Division with our partner Loqate, which is a GPG company and the world's leading location intelligence provider. So Robert, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your help with this. You've been amazing.
Well, thank you very much, Ben. It's very good to be here, and I look forward to our conversation today.
Appreciate it. And thanks again. You've done a lot of work on this, so I appreciate it. Robert, if you don't mind me mentioning, you have a background with IBM. You've been doing this for many years. And in my mind, you're one of the world's foremost experts on location intelligence. So I've asked you to join us today to speak about the location solution as it's been implemented in our Clean and Match software and to help answer questions during our live Q&A. We're going to get started pretty quickly today. We're going to leave as much time as we can for live questions at the end of this webinar. Also keep in mind that if you have registered for this webinar, you'll get an email from me when we finish today. So feel free to respond to that email with any questions or to schedule a time with me if you'd like to discuss anything in more detail. Keep in mind that everyone on this webinar is on mute, but you can ask questions using the question box on the GoToWebinar control panel. And we'll try to open it up to questions at about the 15 or the 20-minute mark. Again, this is a four-part series on global address cleansing. Let's jump over to that next slide here. And we started this series with an overview of address cleansing problems and solutions. Part two was more focused on the general hygiene, the cleansing and normalization. Part three looked very specifically at the address matching and deduplication. And today we're going to cover address verification and enrichment. Let's go ahead and take a look at the agenda for today's webinar here. So we've already covered the introduction, so we're going to start with a quick recap of the key takeaways from the first three parts of this series. We'll talk about address verification, postal certification, geocoding, and other forms of enrichment. And then we'll take a brief look at a very brief demonstration before we open it up to questions. So let's go ahead and start with the recap from the previous parts of this series. So by now it should be pretty clear that addresses and location data are pretty critical components for a variety of business activities, including day-to-day operations such as buying, selling, billing, advertising, mapping, mailing, and deliveries. It should also be pretty clear that this address data is also critical for a variety of other business activities and decisions surrounding investments, such as new construction, mergers and acquisitions, city planning, community engagement, and a lot more. We know that bad data is affecting both business process and business outcomes. We talked about a variety of data quality issues and how data is just really a digital description for real world people, companies, locations, transactions, etc., and how those descriptions are highly variable and highly susceptible to human error and other data quality issues. So most data will require a decent amount of cleansing, validation, and other transformation to make it useful for business purposes. Now we've talked about address profiling and the cleansing and normalization to better understand that first layer of address quality, which is the general hygiene component. Also to solve a variety of problems surrounding the structure, formatting, spacing, casing, fielding, word variations, and other common data quality issues. We've talked about address matching as the foremost effective solution for problems of duplication and as the key to identifying less obvious relationships between different data sets. Another key takeaway was that most business systems and applications are programmed to link, to relate, or to deduplicate data based on exact or near exact matching values. So these longer lines of less standardized text, such as addresses, can cause a variety of different problems. So before I turn it over to Robert here, the question is address verification an all-in-one solution for address cleansing? Well, it's as close as you're going to get, really. But let's just be clear that data quality is really a can of worms, and it all depends on your definition of fit for purpose. Having complete, accurate, normalized, verifiable address data is usually pretty critical, and that's what Loqate does. So we have Address Capture Plus for real-time address ingestion. We also have our Clean and Match software for batch address processing. And when you couple the best-in-class address verification, postal certification, and geocoding from Loqate with WinPeer's award-winning Clean and Match data quality software, you've got a plug-and-play solution that'll solve most of your problems. So Robert, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you for a few minutes so you can talk about what Loqate does, how it works, and some of the other things that our audience might want to know.
Thank you very much, Ben. Let me start off at a high level and talk about what Loqate does. On the left-hand side, you see the cloud-based, public and private cloud-based APIs. One of them is the real-time type ahead that Ben talked about, where you actually start typing in an address, and you start getting presented back a list of addresses based on what you type and based on where you're located. So if I were to type 805, I would see something around me that starts with 805 versus Ben would see something different in a different location. And then there's also phone number verification, email verification. These are services that don't just format or validate the syntax, but actually make sure that they're live phone numbers you can call or emails that you can send to. The second part is what's called the BAT, what Ben referred to as the batch piece. And that's the piece that's, both of these, the real-time type ahead and the batch are integrated into Clean and Match. This is you give it an entire address and you say, give me back the best possible address. To further clarify between the two, the type ahead is meant to be used by a human being because you're picking the one that's right. And the one on the right-hand side is meant to be used by a machine to give you that best possible address. And then of course, there's also certification, also called CAS, and then geocoding or adding latitude and longitude, and then reverse geocoding, getting the closest address to a latitude and longitude. In the center of both of these things is really the secret sauce that is Loqate. And that is, we are a data aggregator. And so there's data that's provided, addressing information for 245 plus countries, territories, and possessions in a single common output structure. So think of this as MDM for addresses, if you will. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about this process. We call it persistent data hierarchy. And if this is a visual representation of the kinds of things that happen, there's a very bespoke or very custom tool that's used to collect the data from the sources and then aggregate them together. And keep in mind, this is for 245 countries, territories, and possessions. So even something that you might think is simple, like the US, is actually not that simple because there's more than one source for the US. The Postal Authority here in the United States Postal Service, is an source for addresses, but they don't carry geocodes. So we have to go to at least one more source to get geocodes and merge those together and create one representation. And that's just the US. Now multiply that by 245 more countries and you get kind of a sense of the scope of what we do here. So let me walk you through what happens when an address comes into Loqate. Next slide, please. The first thing that happens is parsing. And parsing is nothing more than taking the data that's on the input and putting it into buckets. And you can see here in this example, 555 Bailey Street in San Jose. Premise, which is a generic word for house. Street, locality, which is a generic word for city. And administrative area, which is a generic word for state. If, for example, this was a Canadian address, they don't call them states, they call them provinces. So that's why there's this common structure. But anyway, so parsing just puts it into these buckets. And then the next step is actually applying the engine that has thousands of person years of tuning, along with the reference data that's being built in that, using that common structure that I talked about. And you can see here that 555 Bailey Street has been corrected to 555 Bailey Ave. It is in San Jose. You can see that the zip +4 has been added, the zip and the zip +4, as well as Santa Clara, which is the county that that address is in. So if you're doing any kind of analytics and you want to know the counties that the addresses that you have in your system are in, it's automatically added to the output. The third thing that we talk about from a capability perspective is transliteration. Now, this is not translation. This is the concept of taking non-Latin text and representing it in Latin, so that's somebody like me can read it. I don't read or speak Russian, so I wouldn't know how to. I wouldn't know that first word in that address. But because it's been transliterated, it's I can now kind of understand it. So this is for 8 different scripts: Cyrillic, Korean, Japanese, Chinese, Hellenic, which is Greek, Hebrew, and Arabic. So this is another capability. And then the final thing that we're going to talk about is geocoding. Taking that input address after the validation and correction, adding the latitude and longitude to that address. So as part of the processing, and going through this, there's a couple of key fields that come out. One is the address verification code, and the other is the geoaccuracy code. I'm going to use this example, 805 Veterans Street in Redwood City, California, spelled out, USA. So if that goes in to clean and match, what would come out is the 805 Veterans Boulevard, Redwoods, notice the street's been changed. California's, there's an alias to the standard postal abbreviation for the US, and the zip +4 has been added. So after all that correction has happened, the address verification code and the geoaccuracy code are also output, and you'll see the 4-part piece of the address verification code, and then the last piece you see on the screen is the geoaccuracy code. Let me walk you through the important parts of this, because I can spend all day talking about it, but I don't want to do that. So the first piece is the verification status. You need to know how well Clean and Match did in validating this address, and that's what this code is going to tell you. The first piece is how well verified it is. Is it completely verified, or is it partially verified? Ambiguous, meaning that there might be more than one option. And then there's unverified and reverted, so you get the sense that the top one is the most accurate. And then the verification level. So think of these as a level of an address hierarchy, with the top number 5 being the most granular, and that is a delivery point. So that is something like a suite, a unit, a level, a post office box. And then underneath that is the premise or the house number. Thoroughfare is a generic word for street. Locality is a generic word for city. And then admin area is a generic word for state. So you'll know exactly that this has been verified to a premise level. So if you're trying to make sure that you've got good addresses, you're pretty sure that this is a good address. The last piece that's highlighted in white is the match score. So that is a comparison of the input to the output. How much change happened between the input and the output address, the verified address in this case. And in this particular case, street was changed to boulevard. Okay, so that's causing a decrease in this score that's based on 100, so 92. Redwood City, California, those two things didn't force any decrease because those are known valid aliases. And the fact that the zip and zip +4 was added also does not decrease the match score because it's added information. So at the end of the day, you know that this is a good address because you've got verified to the premise level for a US address, and it's a really good match score. Also, the next piece is the latitude and longitude, the geocoding, if you will. And you can see the latitude and longitude here. And the score, the geoaccuracy code that was assigned is a P4. Well, there's another little table to talk about what a P4 means. So P is point, so that means effectively, we have that in the reference data. We have that individual point of that address, and the level is premise or building. So this is effectively a rooftop geocode for that particular address. And as you can see on the screen, that's about as precise as you can get. You can also see on the left-hand side that there's interpolated and average. So interpolated means that while that particular address wasn't there, so 805 might not have been in the reference data, 803 and 807 were there, so we can, and they're on a straight line, on a straight street, so we can pretty much guess where 805 is going to be. Guess is maybe a bad word, but that's what interpolated means. And then average means that we've got some endpoints, but they're not on the same straight line. So you can see here that there's really good accuracy scores for both geocode and for address that tell you exactly what clean and match has done to the system. And I think with that, I'll go ahead and turn it back to Ben so you can start seeing some of this actually in action.
That's great, Robert. Thanks so much. Really, really helpful explanations there. And so again, just thinking back to global address cleansing and some of the things that we've talked about earlier in this series. Again, is the address verification a silver bullet? I mean, this is premium quality data, and whatever that input data is, whatever the quality of that that input address data, it's being then compared and matched to premium address quality data. And again, we've got worldwide coverage. Happy to have that conversation, but it really is as close as a silver bullet as you're going to get. And all of that transformation, that cleansing, it's happening for you. So let's take a quick look at a demo here before we open it up to questions. I want to keep it very short. You can see a few things on my screen here, and essentially just 3 different data sources and our output goal. So the scenario here is very, very common. We're seeing 2 customer records from 3 different data sets from 3 different areas of business. So we've got our master data, and you can see the customer name here, Ann Jones, Becky Smith. You've got the ERP data here. Name appears a little bit differently, Annie, Rebecca, Jones, and Smith. New purchases, where the name appears again a little bit differently, A. Jones, R. Smith. And then again, that output goal here. So we've got 2 customer records from 3 different data sets, 3 different areas of business. Each area of business is working with their own information. So we have 3 different fragmented views of the same 2 customers, right? And we talked about this in part 3 in the context of supplier data in the Harvard Business Review study there. And there were huge business benefits in being able to bring this data together. So if you look at the data more in detail, each system has its own unique ID. We have a customer ID, we have an ERP ID, but these are unique IDs from system to system, right? We have several different versions of the same address. If you look here. So again, just different descriptions, right? Digital descriptions of the customer name, of the address, the location, things like that. We've got several different versions of the customer names. It's also very likely that there are other fragmented duplicate versions of the same customer records that exist within each of these systems, which just adds to the problem. Once you're able to accurately link all of those customer, location, vendor, product, or transaction descriptions to get that single entity view, you'll now have a much more complete set of information and a much deeper understanding of your business, right? So again, this is really that output goal, right? I'm going to show you how easy this is now that we have address verification, right? We've looked at previously how we could profile the data and do some data cleansing, normalization, things like that. Use a variety of data prep techniques and data matching techniques and things like that. But in this case, we can make it very, very simple here. I'm going to start with verify, and I'm just going to go through and tell the system to go ahead and verify these addresses for me, right? This is essentially, kind of one of the things that Robert was talking about there. This is essentially going to enrich the data, layering some new address data on top of what we already have. You can see it here to the right. And it essentially links that input address to a single location, a single verifiable address, right? So we've got a lot of new information here, but it's very consistent, very accurate, very complete, right? So it makes the data much more useful. And we can work with a variety of different formats here. So here you can see the addresses in just a single column. On the ERP side, we're going to go ahead and work with the data that's already been parsed out here. So we're going to tell the system to look at these fields and do the verification that way. You're going to see this data come back here, that return. Again, very clean, very consistent, very easy to work with. Again, taking this here. And if you take a look here, you're going to see that it all kind of boils down to a single verifiable address on each side here, right? Making this data much, much more easier to work with. Right, you can see it here. So now we can skip the cleaning in this particular scenario. Again, a lot of the times to be able to link all of this data accurately, you are going to need to work with, different customer name descriptions and, other details and things like that. Maybe the addresses don't verify, or you've got very, incomplete address information. But this is really a powerful solution here right out of the box. So now we can move over to match, and if we want to do that matching to get that single customer view, quick look at the time here, quick time check. If we start by doing a best-in-class fuzzy match on the address, we're going to see very quickly and easily that we're not going to find those matches. But if I come back here and I tell the system to add a group, and we talked about groups and conditions in part 3. And I tell the system to look for even an exact match on this new address verification output, we're then going to be able to see the matches. Now we've got really confident data, right? You can see that on the screen. So essentially we have 2 groups of customer information. We scroll over and look for, here you can see the different addresses. That's the original input. Over here, you can actually see the return from the address verification, everything very standardized, complete, very accurate. So it all rolled up to single verifiable address points. Just makes our lives much easier, makes the data much more complete, much more accurate, consistent, so on and so forth. But you know what, let's take it a step further. Again, that output goal was to make sure that data from the transaction also had the customer ID and the ERP ID and maybe the ERP, billing cycle or billing frequency and things like that, so that all of these records essentially share the same consistent information, right? And we've got a ways to go here. You can see it's, it's still pretty fragmented at this point. So let's go ahead and start by showing our system fields here. I'm going to go ahead and set master records to master, execute. I've done that in bulk, just using some rules here. I'm going to start with running just a quick update on most of these fields, all but everything else looks good here. I also want to run an overwrite, so not just update blanks, but I also want to overwrite data that may already exist here. I want to do that for most of these fields. Now, this is just an example. Obviously, this is going to be case by case, but billing frequency, no, we're going to leave that blank. We're going to leave these blanks. So it looks pretty good to me. Let's go ahead and run that. And everything is starting to look much more standardized. So now we can feed this data back to each system or send it back to each area of business. And it's much more complete, much more consistent. You can see the addresses, Lat Long Street, the name, the customer ID has now been appended to each of those other records, company, parent company, all of that standardized across the board. Next scenario here is just going to be, or that next layer is just going to be that billing information, the ERP ID, the billing frequency. We also want to update that. So again, we're doing something very, very complex in a very short period of time, right? Using as much automation as we can. We're going to go ahead and say from master, and from master, we're going to update. It's going to fill in those blanks for us. Now we have that information, right? Once more here, we want that transaction ID, so new purchases, execute, update overwrite. We just want that transaction ID. Right? You can see that here. We're just going to go ahead and append that information, right? So I'm moving very, very quickly. This recording will be shared to YouTube after this, so feel free to go back step by step. Now our work is done. The information is complete, it's accurate, it's consistent, it's verifiable. We can go ahead and export at this point, export what we see on the screen. We can also go ahead and do some deduplication, very quick, very simple. Just stick with a single record from that new purchases source. So we have those 2 customer records, complete with all of that additional information there. So I'm going to stop it short. You know, it's a lot to fit into a half an hour here, but we're going to open it up to questions here, see what kind of questions we have coming in. Hopefully that was really useful for everyone. If we run just a minute or 2 over, I apologize in advance, but we want to catch any questions that we might have coming in. Great. So the first question here, and Robert, I'm going to direct this one to you, I think. How does the Loqate address verification compare to a mail management type of system?
That's a great question. So first of all, most mail management systems are using CAS certification and CASS, or Coding Accuracy and Support System. And that's a certification program designed and managed by the United States Postal Service. It has a very strict set of rules to allow for certification of a piece of mail being deliverable, and therefore you can get postal discounts. The challenge with relying on postal certification is that you don't get the flexibility of the kind of fuzzy matching and the data quality that clean and match that can apply before sending it to the verify engine. So verification is a little bit looser and allows for more spelling variations, so you're going to get more verified addresses. And then if you want to take and go ahead and get postal discounts on those, that'll be fine. At the end of the day, that's a limitation on those mailing house providers.
That's great. I really appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, one of the biggest, you know, or the most common observations or, you know, pieces of feedback that I've seen from customers about using address verification is the increased hit rate. How much more of that data is now becoming useful and deliverable, if that's what their purposes are. So that's great. I really appreciate it. Next question here, and you know, again, Robert, I'm going to throw this one over to you if you don't mind.
I don't.
How have you seen end users handle lower quality address verification results?
The typical way is what I call a waterfall approach, and what I mean by that is you take you take your input, you run it, and you're going to define what is quote unquote good and what is quote unquote bad addresses, and you'll determine what your thresholds are, and it's pretty easy to do. Then you'll take the ones that didn't pass your first criteria, and then use clean and match. Go in and do some profiling, try and find patterns. You know, you might find a lot of completely backwards addresses. You might find improperly coded countries. There's a lot of things that you could possibly find after taking that first pass. Then use clean and match, clean up the data, apply the various and sundry rules that you can apply, and then rerun it. And you're going to find that now a larger percentage of what was bad before is now good. And then basically rinse and repeat. And my suggestion is to time box yourself. Give yourself a certain amount of time, you know, a week or whatever it is, or a couple of days, whatever is in your sprint, and do as much as you can. And you'll be able to, using clean and match, you'll be able to accelerate that process and get that list of addresses that are just so bad they can't be fixed, and you'll be able to identify those pretty easily.
That's great. Really appreciate it, Robert. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. We're, you know, doing a quick time check here, and you know, any other questions, please feel free to email. You know, it's been fun. This 4-part series on global address cleansing. I want to thank you all for joining us. Feedback on this series would be appreciated, even if it's just an email response. Worth noting is that we'll soon be releasing a 2020 version of the software that'll include a pay-as-you-go address verification module in all editions of the software. This is a really exciting new enhancement, and we appreciate Robert and our partner Loqate for all of their hard work to help make this possible. If you have any questions about this or about anything else, feel free to pop into one of our Ask the Expert weekly webinars over the next few weeks, and you can ask any questions you might have. Again, Robert, thank you very much for all of your help with this. It's been fun, and I really appreciate all of your hard work.
Thank you very much, Ben. It's been great being here.
That's great. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining. Hope to hear from you soon, and have a great rest of your week.